San Francisco Archbishop Salvatore Cordileone announced that Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi is denied Holy Communion for pro-abortion advocacy. Why is this such a big deal? What's the history behind this decision, and what does it mean going forward? Hello, I'm Eric Sammons, your host of Crisis Point, editor-in-chief of Crisis Magazine. Before we get started, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Let other people know about it, and as we continue to grow. It's amazing how many people I run into that mention the podcast before they mention Crisis Magazine. We get a lot more viewers at Crisis Magazine reading the articles than we do the podcast. But people, when they come up to me, it's typically because of the podcast. They mention the podcast first, not necessarily Crisis Magazine. So I appreciate everybody watching, listening to the podcast. Also, follow us on social media, all the different places. We stream live. These Tuesday afternoon podcasts are streamed live on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Odyssey, and Float. And so you can join us there live, and it'll be on all those locations after we come on. It stays on there. So watch it any of those places. Hopefully we won't get canceled at any of them, but with the topics we cover, sometimes we very well might be. Also, just a reminder, this month we're asking for donations to the to Crisis. So if you could donate, please go to crisismagazine.com/support. Okay, let's go ahead and get started now. So last Friday, May 20th, 2022, Archbishop Corleone of San Francisco announced that Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, and who is a member of the Archdiocese of San Francisco, that she was now to be denied communion. She was banned from receiving Holy Communion in the Archdiocese of San Francisco. Now, this made headline news everywhere, even outside the Catholic world. We have Whoopi Goldberg and others opining about it. But this was a long time coming. And for Catholics who've been following this story for a while, we know this has been going on. This whole story has been going on for a long time. In fact, let's go through the history a little bit of this before we get into actually what Archbishop Corleone did and what the impact of it is going forward and everything like that. So this has been a festering issue in at least the American Church, Catholic Church, for a long time. It goes back even to the 90s, maybe even before then. I wasn't Catholic before the 90s, so maybe it was even before then. But it really wasn't much in the news until 2004. That's when it really broke out into the open. And why is that? Because John Kerry was running for President of the United States. He was a Democratic nominee for President of the United States. And he was a Catholic, and he was pro-abortion. And this was the first time a known pro-abortion Catholic politician was running for president. So it became national news. And I remember, I think it was Cardinal Burke. Well, he was Archbishop Burke of St. Louis. He basically noted that he would not give Kerry communion. If Kerry was to visit St. Louis and go to a Catholic church, he was, and Bishop Burke, Archbishop Burke at the time, if he was distributing communion, he would not give it to Kerry. This got to be a big issue, and there was a lot of debate about what would the bishops do. What would they come out with? USCCB come out with a statement. The USCCB had one of their regular meetings in June of 2004. So this is during Kerry had just been nominated officially, or he was about to be. Everybody knew he was the candidate. And so everybody was wondering, what would the bishops do? What would the USCCB do? And like I said, there was a couple bishops, Burke being the most notable, who said he should not receive communion. But the vast majority of bishops were not very comfortable with that. In fact, even the quote-unquote conservative bishops didn't seem to be comfortable with it. For example, Cardinal George of Chicago, I think he was a cardinal already, but he was the Archbishop of Chicago. He stated that he was not comfortable with it. In fact, I think he said something to the fact of in an interview with John Allen, he said that limits should be placed upon abortion within the realm of politics are matters of prudential judgment about which there can be many discussions even within the church. So he didn't come out strongly for that. Also, Avery Dulles, Cardinal Avery Dulles, who wasn't a bishop, but he was a well-known theologian, one of the most prominent American theologians in the church of the time, and he was actually made a cardinal by Pope John Paul II. He seemed to indicate that he wasn't comfortable with the idea of denying Kerry communion either. So then, leading up to this meeting, the bishops' meeting, USCCB meeting, in which they were going to make a statement about this, in June of 2004, Cardinal Ratzinger, who was the head of the Congregation of Doctrine of the Faith at the time under John Paul II, he sent a letter to basically Cardinal McCarrick of the USCCB. I don't know if he sent it directly to Cardinal McCarrick or just USCCB and Cardinal McCarrick got a hold of it. But that is interesting what happened there, because his letter to them stated unequivocally, basically, that you should not give communion to somebody, a pro-abortion politician like this. It says, the question has been raised as to whether denial of Holy Communion to some... Oops, am I reading the right one? No, I'm reading the wrong one. Sorry. Let me read what Ratzinger wrote. He said that basically he talks about how you have to have discussions with the pro-abortion politician. You have to try to convert them, help them to see what they're doing is wrong. It says, when these precautionary measures have not had their effect, or in which they were not possible, and the person in question, with obstinate persistence, still presents himself to receive Holy Communion, the minister of Holy Communion must refuse to distribute it. This decision, properly speaking, is not a sanction or a penalty, nor is the minister of Holy Communion passing judgment on the person's subjective guilt, but rather is reacting to the person's public unworthiness to receive Holy Communion due to an objective situation of sin. So Ratzinger basically said to them, no, they should not receive communion. They should be denied communion. Somebody like John Kerry should be denied communion because of the person's public unworthiness to receive Holy Communion due to an objective situation of sin. So Ratzinger made it very clear. However, Cardinal McCarrick, who was cardinal at the time, obviously, but is no longer cardinal, he responded. I'm losing my notes here. Where did I put that? Sorry about that. Okay, here it is. So Cardinal McCarrick basically told the bishops, told the USCCB, that he told the assembly that what he had from the Holy See professions of their trust. I'm sorry. McCarrick also told the assembly that he had from the Holy See professions of their trust in the responsibility of the American bishops. Thus, they may judge whether the refusal of communion is a pastorally wise and prudent decision. Basically, he lied. Big shock that McCarrick, the monster McCarrick, would have lied. So he lied about what Ratzinger said. He told the bishops that the Vatican basically told them, it's up to you. You guys make a decision how you think it's best to do it, and we'll back that. But that's not at all what Ratzinger had written to them. So McCarrick lies to the USCCB. The USCCB then issues a document called Catholics in Political Life, which was about as worthless as every other USCCB document ever produced. And it said, and the key part of it says, it has a lot of words because they like to, waste paper and waste pixels. The question has been raised as to whether the denial of Holy Communion to some Catholics in political life is necessary because of their public support for abortion on demand. Given the wide range of circumstances involved in arriving at a prudential judgment on a matter of this seriousness, we recognize that such decisions rest with the individual bishop in accord with the established canonical and pastoral principles. Bishops can legitimately make different judgments on the most prudent course of pastoral action. So essentially what the USCCB did under McCarrick's direction, because McCarrick was really the one pushing very hard. Remember, he was the Archbishop of Washington, D.C. He knew if the USCCB came out and said that pro-abortion Catholic politicians could not receive communion, he was the main person who had to deal with it. Because as the Archbishop of Washington, D.C., he had to deal with Kerry already as senator and all the other pro-abort politicians like Nancy Pelosi and others who were living in D.C., going to church in D.C. So McCarrick really is the author of American Bishops' Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy, essentially, about communion for pro-abortion politicians. It's important to remember that it's McCarrick, Theodore McCarrick, the monster, who is the author of, the originator of the American Bishops' decision not to do anything about pro-abortion politicians. And this was back in 2004, so 18 years ago this happened. And Cardinal McCarrick really is the origin of it. And so what happened then after this document came out, the bishops did nothing. Essentially, they all decided, we're not going to say anything. We're not going to do anything. And that's the way it stayed. Now, of course, Kerry did not get elected president, so we didn't actually have a pro-abortion Catholic president at the time. And so it kind of went underground. Yes, it'd pop up here and there over the years, but since we didn't have a president, somebody running for president, it wasn't a national issue anymore. Yes, there were Catholics like me, like so many others, who urged bishops to deny communion to these pro-abortion politicians like Nancy Pelosi, like Joe Biden. And when Joe Biden was vice president under Obama, the issue would pop up every once in a while. But McCarrick's successor, Cardinal Wuerl, did nothing about it as well. Now, I will say this. Cardinal Wuerl stated at one point that if a politician's home diocese ruled that that person was banned from Holy Communion, that he would honor it in Washington, D.C. I think it was 2012 he said that. I'm not 100% sure of the exact year he said that. And so he said he would honor that, which is very interesting. We'll get back to that a little bit later, but that's very interesting. He said he would honor. Now, did he say that because he just assumed no bishop would ever go and actually ban a person from Holy Communion? Perhaps. But the fact is that is what he said. Now, so essentially the issue was left festering, and it just was something that was brought up every once in a while in Catholic circles, but nothing was ever done about it. Then let's go to 2012 again. Archbishop Cordileone becomes the Archbishop of San Francisco. So this is 10 years ago that Corleone becomes the Archbishop of San Francisco. Now, of course, the reason this is important is because Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, says she's a devout Catholic, is rabidly pro-abortion. And she's been pro-abortion her whole entire career. She's received a Margaret Sanger Award from Planned Parenthood. She talks about her support of abortion often, publicly, and she continues to go to Mass and receive communion. And so she is a member of the Archdiocese of San Francisco. So it would be Corleone's decision whether or not to ban her from Holy Communion. And many ask him to do this. Now, I will say from the beginning, Archbishop Cordileone spoke a good game. He talked a good game. He would talk about the need to deny he talked about the need for pro-abortion politicians to repent, that they should not receive communion. That was basically up to them, but they should not do that. He spoke a good game, but he really did nothing. And so a lot of people were, including myself, were disappointed and frustrated with him, because here was a bishop who obviously got it on the one hand. Like he said that a pro-abortion politician was wrong and should not receive communion, unlike a Wuerl or a McCarrick who basically winked and nodded and said it's okay. Corleone said it wasn't okay, yet he never did anything for so long. And so a lot of us were frustrated by that, and we're disappointed in Corleone. He was supposed to be our champion, but yet he wasn't. Then we get to 2021, May 1st, 2021. This is 9 years after he's been Archbishop of San Francisco. He releases a pastoral letter called "Before I Formed You in the Womb, I Knew You." And it was all about basically pro-abortion politicians receiving communion. And essentially he was saying there that they should not receive communion. He detailed his reasons why. And he even said that a bishop could deny somebody Holy Communion if they're a pro-abortion politician. Now, what he talked about in that document were he had a three-step process for this, what a bishop would do with a pro-abortion politician. First, he said, it rightly begins with private conversations between the erring Catholic and his or her parish priest or bishop. The experience of some of us in church leadership over many years demonstrates the sad truth that often such interventions can be fruitless. It can happen that conversations tend to go nowhere, thus leaving it easy for the individual to continue participating fully in the life of the church. Such a situation is a cause of scandal to many of the faithful. When you read this, when it came out, you're thinking, yes, why haven't you done something then? We know it's been fruitless. Nancy Pelosi hasn't changed at all. Yet this is a cause of scandal, and he admits this. And he says, because we are dealing with public figures and public examples of cooperation and moral evil, this correction can also take the public form of exclusion from the reception of Holy Communion. So that's step two. So step one is conversations between the bishop and the public person who supports abortion to try and get them to convert. And this does make sense that this would be the first step. That's exactly what you should do. You shouldn't automatically do a canonical penalty on somebody. You should first reach out to them and talk to them. I think everybody would agree with that. And at some point, though, you have to decide, we have to do the canonical penalty, have them refrain from public exclusion from reception of Holy Communion. And he also mentions a third step after that step, which is excommunication. And so he details that basically Step 1 is the private conversation, and that's under Canon 916. Canon 916 says, a person who is conscious of grave sin is not to celebrate Mass or receive the body of the Lord without previous sacramental confession. Unless there's a grave reason, there's no opportunity to confess. Basically, what it's saying is that the person is obligated to not go up to Holy Communion if they know they're in a state of sin, of conscious of grave sin. And so what he's saying in the private conversations is he's telling the person, hey, you fall under Canon 916. You should not go up for communion. And so that's essentially falls under 916. The second step to deny them Holy Communion, that is under Canon 915. That's the more famous one. That one states, those who have been excommunicated or interdicted after the imposition or declaration of the penalty and others obstinately persevering in manifest grave sin are not to be admitted to Holy Communion. In this case, it's the obstinately persevering in manifest grave sin that the pro-abortion politicians fall under. They are not to be admitted. So now the burden isn't on the person receiving, but on the person distributing communion, the pastor, the priest, the bishop, whoever distributing Holy Communion. They are not to admit them to Holy Communion. And so that's step 2. And then step 3, excommunication, is a whole nother part of canon law that is a more formal thing. Now, so this basically is what he laid out, what Corleone laid out in his document, Before I Formed You in the Womb, I Knew You, that came out May 1st, 2021. Now, shortly after that, I interviewed Archbishop Corleone here on Crisis Point. And I asked, we talked about the document, we went over a lot, but I asked him directly about Nancy Pelosi, because I'm like, I can't actually talk to him and interview him without asking, why has he not denied Nancy Pelosi Holy Communion? Why has he not gone to step 2 yet? And I'm going to replay that here. It's just a short clip from the show from last year. I'm going to replay it here so you can hear his answer that he gave at that time. This is from May 21st, 2021. Now, Speaker Pelosi is probably after President Biden, is the most prominent Catholic, self-identified Catholic politician who supports abortion in this country. And she has been around. She's been prominent politician for decades now, and she's always been very pro-abortion. She even won a Margaret Sanger Award from Planned Parenthood, I believe it was like 5 or 10 years ago, because of her complete support for abortion. Now, I know you've been there for 9 years. Why? I know what the question everybody, all the people listening to this want to know. Why have you not announced like she cannot go to communion or excommunicated or something like that? Why have you? That has not happened. And I think a lot of lay Catholics are like, well, why doesn't he do that? And so I just want to ask you directly, why hasn't that happened, or what has happened?
As I said, those conversations have to take place first. I have had some of that. I don't want to go into their private conversations. Right. But to repeat what I said, the bishop or the pastoral leader has to have arrived at a point where he knows there's no benefit to be derived from this. It's going to be fruitless, and weigh all those other factors. So all I can say is I'm not at that point yet.
Okay. So in that 3-step process that you had talked about before, conversations, then publicly telling your diocese, the priest and everything, okay, this person needs to be denied communion. And then the 3rd step would be excommunication. What you're saying is with Speaker Pelosi is you're on that first stage of and weighing based on your conversations and other factors, whether that you're still in that first stage. Would that be a correct?
Yes. What would be best for the church and the church's witness?
Okay.
Life and preserving unity.
Okay.
I'm still in that early phase. Yes.
Okay. So that was from last May 2021, and I admit I was. You might have heard it in my tone of voice, but I was frustrated by that answer, because I couldn't see how after 9 years he could still be in that stage. Now, he made the point that there are consequences when he would do something publicly. There would be backlash, and that you have to weigh that. And I get that. As a bishop, he has to weigh all the different factors, not just one factor, but all the factors. And so I was just like, okay, I guess we have another bishop who talks well but doesn't act. But a year later, he did act. And so we have to give credit to him, and I don't see any reason now to cry over spilled milk. They didn't do it earlier, because the fact is now he has done it. he has announced that she is to be denied Holy Communion. He said in a letter to her that was made public, he first sent a letter to her. He says, in striving to follow this direction, I'm grateful to you for the time you've given me in the past to speak about these matters. He's talking about having to meet with her, with somebody before he would deny them communion. Unfortunately, I have not received such an accommodation to my many requests to speak with you again since you vowed to codify the Supreme Court's Roe v. Wade decision in federal law following the passage of Texas Senate Bill 8 last September. That is why I communicated my concerns to you via letter on April 7th, 2022, and informed you that should you not publicly repudiate your advocacy for abortion rights, or else refrain from referring to your public faith in public, to your Catholic faith in public, and receiving Holy Communion, I would have no choice but to make a declaration in keeping with Canon 915 that you're not to be admitted to Holy Communion. So he makes it very clear to her, and he makes it for that letter coming out publicly, is that he tried. You cannot say that Archbishop Corleone did not try with every best intention and every best effort to bring Nancy Pelosi over to the side of life. I mean, he clearly tried. He says he made many requests to talk to her. He wanted her to stop her abortion advocacy, or at least stop saying that she's Catholic, one of the two. He did everything. And for all of us who wanted to criticize him for not acting sooner, at the same token, it's very obvious to everybody that this was an act of last resort for him. He was not trying to grandstand. He wasn't trying to make some political hay. He was doing everything he could to try to get her to convert before he took this more drastic action of denying her Holy Communion. So, I mean, I think we have to acknowledge that. Then Archbishop Cordileone also released a letter to the laity, to the public, about what he did. And he said, after numerous attempts to speak with her, Pelosi, to help her understand the grave evil she is perpetrating, the scandal she is causing, and the danger to her own soul she is risking, I have determined that the point has come in which I must take a public declaration that she is not to be admitted to Holy Communion unless and until she publicly repudiates her support for abortion rights. He always puts rights in parentheses, in quotes, because he knows it's not actually a right. And confess and receive absolution for her cooperation in this evil in the sacrament of penance. So he makes it very clear he tried very hard to talk to her. He's made repeated attempts. She will not repent, and so she cannot receive Holy Communion. But he makes it also very clear that she can come back to the sacrament if she repudiates her support for abortion and confesses and receives absolution in the sacrament of confession. So, I mean, that is a very important thing to remember, is that this does not have to be a permanent state for Nancy Pelosi. Tomorrow, she could receive communion legitimately and validly, because all she has to do is go to reach out to Archbishop Corleone, repudiate her support for abortion, publicly repudiate it, go to confession, and she goes to communion just like the rest of us sinners. And so that's very important to remember. She's not being permanently banned from Holy Communion. She's just being banned until she makes the choice to return to Christ, return to the church, and return to supporting life. Now, I think the question a lot of people have asked is, why now? Why did Archbishop Corleone decide to now do this after so long, after a year after he announced that he was still thinking about it? Why did he decide to do this now? I don't think we can know for sure. I think there's a little bit of different speculations. One is that he might have had a time frame. When he issued that pastoral letter back last May, he might have said to himself, listen, I'm giving her another year. I'm going to try my best during that year to bring her around. And if it fails, I'm then going to just simply have to make this decision to deny her Holy Communion. That's one possibility, because it did happen almost exactly a year after that letter came out. A second thing, another possibility is he kind of alludes to it, is that she has gotten more adamant in her advocacy for abortion, if that's even possible, particularly a federal decision to codify. It's important to remember a Speaker of the House actually doesn't do anything to make abortion legal, because it's the Supreme Court that unconstitutionally made it legal. And so there's not a lot of opportunities in the House to actually make abortion more legal, because it can't be made more legal. But what she did was, when the Texas heartbeat law passed last September, she really tried to push a federal law to codify Roe v. Wade. And then again, this past month, when there's rumors that Roe v. Wade is about to be overturned, she also pushed a bill to try to make abortion legal federal as a federal law that would be legal. And so I think Corleone saw it's not even like she's trying at this point to get better on this. She's actually getting worse. And she's using her position as Speaker of the House to really advocate for this grave evil of abortion. And so I think that's probably one of the biggest reasons why is he saw, okay, this is not, my conversations are doing nothing at this point. My attempts at conversation, I should say, are doing nothing. She's simply adamant in her abortion advocacy. And so therefore, he made this decision. Now, what some other questions that arise out of this? First is, what other bishops are supporting Archbishop Corleone? Now, you might ask, why is this important? Some people say, well, it's just a decision of a local archbishop with a local member of his community, so other bishops don't have to say anything. It's not like bishops make commentaries about every diocese, every bishop making any decision within their diocese. But of course, that's naive, and it's kind of like being purposely obtuse to say that, because this isn't happening in a vacuum. Nancy Pelosi is one of the most famous women in America, and she is probably the second most powerful. Well, is Kamala Harris really powerful? But she is one of the most powerful women in America. She is a Catholic, self-professed Catholic, and she's rabidly pro-abortion. And this has been a major issue in America for many years. So, in the American church. So I do think it would be good for bishops to comment on this. I think it is good for all bishops to say, yes, we support this, because it would show then a united front that in America, if you're a Catholic politician, you cannot support abortion. No matter where you go, you would not be able to receive communion. I think that'd be a great thing. Now, I think we all know that's not going to happen. It would be great. Now, some bishops have spoken out about this. At my last count, I think there were about 15 that have come out in support. Archbishop Aquila of Denver, Bishop Barber of Oakland. That's important to the bordering diocese with San Francisco. Bishop Carey of Baker, Oregon. Coakley of Oklahoma City. Conley. Daly, Hying, Nauman, who's the Archbishop of Kansas City, Kansas, Olson, Paprocki, Ricken, Strickland, Tobin, the good Tobin, the one in Providence, Rhode Island, Vasa, and Wall. Now, Vasa is interesting because he is the Bishop of Santa Rosa, California. The reason that matters is because Nancy Pelosi has a vacation house there. Because, she makes under like $200,000 a year, but somehow she's worth like, $100 million or something, because, it's nice to be in Congress for that long. But she has a vacation house in the Santa Rosa diocese in California. And so she would be living there at times and presumably going to mass in that diocese as well. And Bishop Vasa did tell his bishops, we will abide by this, what Corleone says, and you're not to give her communion there either. So that's very good news. And so I do think it's important for bishops to speak up about this. And I think their silence does say something. Now, if it's some obscure bishop out in the middle of nowhere, he might even say something nobody would know about it. But let's talk about the big boys. A Cardinal Dolan of New York, Cardinal Gregory of Washington, D.C., obviously is the most important. Cardinal Supich of Chicago, Archbishop Gomez of Los Angeles, the auxiliary bishop of Los Angeles, who's the most prominent bishop in the country, Bishop Barron, Robert Barron. None of them have said anything. Bishop, what's the cardinal's name in Houston? The cardinal in Houston, I can't remember his name now. I'm blanking on it. He has not said anything. And I think this really is important. I think this matters. And I think it's a certain moral cowardice on some of them, and actually evil on others. Like, we know Supich and Gregory are actually against this. And so they're not going to say anything, or if they do say anything, they'll be against it. So they're actually supporting evil. But a Dolan or a Barron or a Gomez, somebody like that, are they supporting this? Or are they just silent out of cowardice? And I think that's an important question. I think it's probably their cowardice, to be honest. They know they don't want to rock the boat. Bishops are like senators. They don't want to criticize each other on anything other than allowable disagreements. And so I think they're not going to say anything. I think that's very sad. I gave them a few days, because when it came out on Friday, I was like, listen, Friday afternoon this comes out. A lot of these bishops have confirmations, ordinations this weekend. They're not going to drop everything. They might not even know about it until Monday. But now it's Tuesday. I'm starting to think the clock's ticking. And any bishop who has not said anything yet, likely is not going to say anything, and I think that's shameful that they wouldn't support Corleone on this very important issue and publicly support him. Now, one of the questions that's come up is how binding is this in other dioceses? Because Nancy Pelosi actually went to communion, went to mass, and received Holy Communion on Sunday. So 2 days after this came out, at Holy Trinity Church in Washington, D.C. There's a video out showing that this happened. It's a very well-known liberal church. And so she received Holy Communion there. Now, here's the thing. Archbishop Corleone made this very clear when I interviewed him last year, is that of the three-step process, the second step of denying communion to her, that is attached to the diocese, meaning it's applicable only in the Archdiocese of San Francisco. So the bishops and the bishop, the priests, and the deacons and Eucharistic ministers in that diocese are bound to that. They're bound to deny her Holy Communion if she presents herself communion in the Archdiocese of San Francisco. Now, of course, what will happen if she does that and some priest gives her communion anyway? We'll find out. Will Archbishop Corleone go punish that bishop, that priest, or not? We don't know. But the next step, which is excommunication, that attaches itself to the person. So no matter where the person goes, they are excommunicated. And so Bishop Corleone did not excommunicate Pelosi. So therefore, other dioceses, other bishops and priests are not bound to deny her Holy Communion, canonically speaking, at least. Now, that being said, obviously, she falls under Canon 915 even before Corleone said anything about it. She should have been denied communion for decades now. And so obviously all the different dioceses, all the different priests and bishops and deacons should deny her communion. And they should do it not just because Corleone made this decree, but just in general, she should have been denied communion long ago, just like President Biden should have been. So, but technically speaking, a priest in the Archdiocese of Washington, D.C. is not bound by Corleone's decree because he can only bind his own priests and deacons in his diocese. So what I imagine what's going to happen is, for now, nothing, because she'll continue to receive communion in D.C. The question is, will she try to receive Holy Communion in a diocese where a bishop has supported Corleone? So, for example, in Santa Rosa, but most especially in San Francisco. When she goes back to San Francisco, will she try to receive Holy Communion? And then what happens if she does? So I think that's a big question. So going forward, what does this mean? I think a couple things. First of all, the response of different people matters. So Pelosi herself has obviously shown by going to communion anyway on Sunday that she's ignoring this decree and she's putting her soul in even greater jeopardy. I mean, her soul is in great jeopardy already, and now it's going to be even in more jeopardy because of this. When you receive communion unworthily, she has no excuse, in other words. She can't say she wasn't warned. This is the loving part of Corleone's decision. It's loving and charitable towards Nancy Pelosi because now she knows. And so she ignores that. That's on her soul. It's not on Corleone's soul anymore. He did his job. But the other responses are, first of all, Cardinal Gregory, what's he going to do? I think it's been clear that there was this funny email that came out from his communications department where they accidentally sent it to the wrong person, where they said, oh, we're just going to ignore all these people asking us to comment on this. And I think that's what's going to happen, is that he is going to just not do anything about this. He might try to even never comment about it. I mean, Wuerl said years ago that he would abide by another bishop doing this, but Gregory obviously is not going to do that. So I think that's important to note, is that Cardinal Gregory is going to continue to let her receive communion there in D.C. Now, the other big question, though, is what will the Vatican do about this? Pope Francis has made it very clear, crystal clear, that he does not think you should deny Holy Communion to somebody who's a pro-abortion politician. He has said he's never denied communion to anybody. And he made it very clear that, I mean, explicitly, don't try to play this Popeologist, people who try to Pope-splain everything, that he would support Corleone. He does not support Corleone. Now, here's the thing. Corleone is 65 years old. He has 10 more years left before he's required to retire. Will he be early retire? Will he have to do an early retirement or sent to Siberia or something like that? We don't know. But I think we can confidently know that Pope Francis is not happy with Corleone about this, and the other bishops supporting him. So it'll be interesting to see how they react. If they do some type of passive aggressive thing where Pope Francis basically rails on Corleone without saying his name, where he throws him under the bus like he does Cardinal Zen, we'll see what happens. But that's going to be interesting to see as well. Also, another response to look forward to is the political and the secular response. Already, we've had calls for the church to be taxed, the Catholic Church to be taxed because supposedly they get involved in politics, which obviously they're not, because this is a completely internal decision of the church to decide who goes to communion. That's completely 100% internal to the church. But they're saying we need to tax churches. Big calls for that. Also, there's actually been calls from like papers and secular papers for the Pope to get rid of Archbishop Corleone, which is just ludicrous as well. So I think we're going to see a lot that's going to happen as well. I also fully expect dirty tricks against Corleone. It's like when Elon Musk all of a sudden started getting off the woke side. Now they start coming out with accusations about his past. Same thing's going to happen with Corleone. They're going to make accusations. They're going to try to dig any dirt they can to come up on Corleone, so he has to resign, so they'll attack him. And I also think it could increase the chances of a likelihood of pro-abortion forces attacking Catholic churches around the country. This is just another thing that's going to enrage them about Catholicism. And so I think that could happen as well. But that being said, so that's kind of the negative possible responses. This is obviously a good, and there's a lot of good that's coming out of it. I've already seen people online say that they have greater respect for the Catholic Church, that they're even considering becoming Catholic because they see the church really does stand for life. And that's what we've been saying from the beginning, is that obviously you do this first and foremost for Nancy Pelosi's soul, but also for the witness to life. The fact is that the Catholic Church in America has been a paper tiger when it comes to fighting abortion, because she will not stand up for the unborn where she has the power to do so, which is at the communion rail. Because she has not spoken up and really done, she's spoken, but she hasn't taken action. Because she hasn't done that, we've been a paper tiger. And this now puts some teeth to our teaching that abortion is a grave evil that is always wrong and it should always be opposed. And so people are starting to see that. And I think that's a very good thing in Corleone's decision to do this. A very good response to that is, a good consequence is that people will now know for a fact, if you're Catholic, you have to be pro-life. There are no other options. You have to be against abortion if you're a Catholic. That's what we want people to think. In fact, I became Catholic partly because of the church's pro-life witness under John Paul II back in the early 90s. And so to see a bishop stand up for life like this, even though they're going to get attacked, I think is a great thing. I do think we will see conversions to Catholicism because of this. And I think we should praise God for that and pray for those people who are considering conversion because of this. Okay, well, I'm running a little long here, so I'm going to wrap it up here. Let's pray for Archbishop Corleone, first of all, that he needs our prayers. He's going to be attacked viciously because of this. Pray for other bishops to stand strong, the bishops who have supported him already, and pray for other bishops to support him throughout the country. Pray for those bishops, somebody like Cardinal Gregory, where it really matters in Washington, D.C. Pray for his conversion, frankly, conversion to Catholicism. And also, let's pray for Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden and other pro-abortion politicians, Catholic politicians, that they would have a conversion of heart and begin to defend the unborn. Can you imagine what a huge deal that would be if all of a sudden Nancy Pelosi came out and said, I repent of having supported abortion, and now I will defend life in my career? I mean, that would be just one of the most beautiful things that could happen. And don't say it's not possible, because God can do anything. So let's pray for that to happen, for the conversion of Nancy Pelosi, which is, I know that's exactly what Archbishop Corleone wants in doing this. Okay, everybody, that's it for now. Until next time, everybody, God love you.